politics in the pub tonight. It's going to be a really, really great night. Thank you to everybody for coming. Big welcome to both our ANU students and our UC students. And of course, I would also like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to both the elders past and present, and also like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So again, a huge welcome to everybody. My name is Harry and I get the awesome experience of emceeing everybody tonight. So hello everybody. I think everybody knows that it's going to be a great year for us here in the ACT, especially. It's going to be a big year. We've got a double whammy in elections coming up. We've got our ACT election, of course, and of course also our federal election. So I feel like everybody's really pumped. I'm getting a great vibe from the room. I'm feeling it, you're feeling it, we're good to go. Really exciting. I hope everyone's enrolled to vote. I mean, not only for the pleasure of exercising your democratic voice, but also hopefully we'll have two exciting winners who are going to get the awesome prize of speaking to Scott over a drink, Scott and Christina over a drink tonight. So that's really exciting. I'll also mention quickly, we've got a Twitter hashtag going tonight, so if anyone's Twitter savvy, you can tweet to Scott and Christina in the pub, and that's an and with an AND. Okay, I'd also like to say that we will have Shane Rattenbury here in the audience tonight. I'm not quite sure, but keep your eye out for him. He is our Greens MLA. He's also the Assembly Education Minister, and he'll be around to have a bit of a chat later today as well. Okay, so I would like to kick off tonight by introducing Christina Hobbs. She is the lead Senate candidate in the federal election. She was born in the wonderful town that we're all in right now, Canberra. She happened to study in the ANU. She did a double degree in Science and Commerce, and she went on to do her postgrad in Economics at the Uni of London. She spent 6 years being an economist and a food security expert in the UN World Food Programme, and she's worked in Africa, Asia and the Middle East. She's also lived and worked in Syria, Turkey and also Nepal for quite a substantial period of time. At present, she's a board director for the Global Women's Project. She also used to be a deputy manager of Earth Hour, so that's super exciting. Even more exciting is that in 2014, she helped establish Future Super, which, crazily enough, is Australia's first super fund that doesn't invest in fossil fuels. So I happen to think that's really exciting. So if you do too, you guys should put your hands together for Christina as she makes this. Thank you for that amazing introduction. I feel like half my speech is already gone, but it was great. It's really great being back here because I actually graduated from ANU about a decade ago, and I never thought I would end up at a politics in the pub, and especially not as a lead candidate for the Greens. And I was sort of reflecting with some people in the office the other day about, why I was never really interested in politics when I was at uni, and I came to the conclusion that it was probably because one of my first jobs while I was at uni was actually working at Parliament House as a personal trainer in the gym there. And I tell you, there's nothing that makes you want to become a politician less than watching 60 to 70-year-old white men in their sweatpants, sweating like crazy with a treadmill on about 3.8 kilometres an hour. I did not want to become one of those. So I finished my degree and decided instead to go into finance. And it wasn't that I didn't care about social issues, but I had this really interesting concept at the time that the best way of me changing the world was probably to become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and do it while I was earning about $1 million a year. So my views on that have sort of changed over the years. I didn't completely hate my job in finance, but I did feel a bit lonely. I was quite interested in things like tax fairness and income equality, and my peers were quite interested in things like pivot tables, PowerPoint presentations and watch brands. So at some point I decided to change careers and ended up in the UN. And I think it was really this experience of working in a completely different field that really sort of led me on this path. And particularly, I think working with smallholder farmers and really poor farmers. And my first sort of role was working in Nepal up in the Himalayas near the Tibetan border. And it was crazy being up in this area where most people hadn't even completed primary school, but yet these farmers could explain to me in quite intricate detail how climate change was affecting their cropping seasons and how they no longer had a winter cropping season. And through the power of BBC radio, they'd heard these concepts and could see how it was applying to their lives, which was a lot more than the politicians in our parliament, some of which had studied at Oxford. So, this sort of continued, but it was really the last couple of years of my career where I was working in Syria, and I was sent over to start an operation to work with people that were fleeing conflict, so north of Halep, so between Aleppo and the Turkish border, and then people coming into Turkey and across Lebanon and Jordan. And it was just this incredible, surreal experience of days where we would have sometimes 1,000 people crossing the border, sometimes 6,000 people crossing the border. There was one particular 2-day period where we had 100,000 people crossing the border. And, obviously in a middle-income country like Turkey, this was quite contentious with the local populations, and yet the government continued to allow people in. So when I first started, there was about 20,000 people in Turkey, and by the time I finished, there was about 1.5 million people 18 months later. And I think sort of working in this situation and reflecting back, the news stories that were coming out of Australia about Australia sending 2 Syrian asylum seekers back to Syria, that was just quite embarrassing at the time. It was also, I think, this period where I really started reflecting on how our international politics had impacted this region, and particularly on our involvement in the war in Iraq, which we just sort of stopped talking about after we realised it had completely failed and sort of faded out of our memory. But there was one particular morning when I was in a hotel, and I don't sort of normally go on about my war stories, but this was a really, really strong one in my mind still, and I was quietly eating my cornflakes to myself, and these 2 guys from the Syrian Opposition Council came up to start sort of berating me about how useless the UN was, which was fine. I sort of sat there. But as I started talking, one of the guys said to me, "Are you Aussie?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, my cousin lives in Adelaide." And I was like, "Cool." And he was like, "You guys shouldn't have gone into Iraq. This is what's directly led to ISIS. ISIS is led by the former Iraqi army." And it was just, really shocking for me. But I think it was the discussions I had afterwards where I was carrying some of their messages back to our diplomats who were working in that area about how, the key message there was that they did not want to see a foreign intervention in their country, that they strongly felt that us going into that war and bombing them would exasperate the situation, would make it much, much worse. And when I was talking to the diplomats and passing this message on, they had the same intelligence. They would say, "We realise this is exactly what we're being told as well." And yet only 6 months after returning back, our country was again talking about entering war and, started bombing. And, so I think it's sort of these experiences that made me realise that, if you can't create change as a CEO of a Fortune 500 country and you can't change it in the UN, that, maybe you need to come back and get political. And one of the first things that I did was I just sort of cruised up to the Liverpool Plains to see what was happening with some of the farmers there, because I've been working with farmers in Africa as well that were fighting against coal and gas. So I kind of just wanted to understand what was happening in Australia, and who sort of here has a bit of an understanding about what's happening in the Liverpool Plains and coal mines and farmers? A bit of an understanding? It was probably sort of what I had. But it was this really incredibly eye-opening experience to go up and watch these farmers that were essentially on the front line of, almost this sort of like internal mini civil war where, alongside Greenpeace activists, every day they were staging actions into the coal mine and, third generational farmers tying themselves to things to try to stop this mine from happening. And hearing these people who were losing their land, losing their water in what is our prime agricultural country was really shocking to me. Listening to Aboriginal elders talk about how land that they had native title over was being completely destroyed, and along with that some of our most precious and ancient Aboriginal artefacts was really incredible. And, what I heard a lot from people and a lot from farmers was this concept of short-sightedness, and, how can the government be so short-sighted? And, how can we, worship this kind of short-term profit and high-income jobs over, this land that has produced food for 60,000 years? But what was really interesting was that the ICAC inquiry was going on at the same time, so the corruption inquiry in New South Wales. And what we were sort of learning was that this had nothing to do with being short-sighted and everything to do with the fact that the owners of these mining companies had actually bribed the Liberal Party, the Labor Party and the National Party. Shame. Yeah, and that this was coming out, and yet these mines were still going ahead.
And I think that's what led me to the Greens, because on this issue and on every issue I cared about, the Greens were the only ones speaking with integrity. And there was a reason for that. And, I think that most politicians probably enter politics for the right reasons, because they want to create change. But through these experiences, what I had learned was just how the influence of money had really affected politics, and the situation was getting worse, and how the Greens were a fundamentally different party, as a party that doesn't accept donations from unethical large corporations, and as a party where, as a member, you can actually write the policy, and where, potentially at times our parliamentarians, might find this a bit challenging, but they don't get to determine the policy platform, the actual members do, and they only have one vote in that process along with all the states. And so I was really intrigued by this fundamentally different way of doing politics, which is why I started volunteering with the Greens. And here I am sort of a year later, now the lead candidate for the Senate in what is one of the most winnable Senate seats in the country and one of the most marginal Senate seats in the country. And what's really exciting for me, and the reason why I did it, is because it's the only Senate seat in the country where we have the opportunity to get rid of one of the most conservative politicians that has ever been in our government. Somebody who doesn't believe in marriage equality, doesn't really want to support climate action, who spent half an hour in Parliament talking about the need to, support the coal industry through these difficult times, and really hasn't stood up for Canberra. And that was a key reason why I decided to run. And I've had quite a few people today and previously ask me how they can get involved, and if they can actually make a difference, and even with a small amount of time, what they can do. And I guess what I've said to them, what I want to say to you tonight, is that any support that anyone wants to provide is really appreciated. No matter what the issue is that you care about, I'm sure there's a home for you in the Greens. And I think in terms of, is your time valued, I think it could be incredibly valuable, and it's probably the most important thing that I think many of us could be doing this year. It's certainly the most important thing I thought I could be doing this year. And if you look at someone like Scott Ludlam, we literally have him in Parliament because a whole lot of people, particularly young people in WA, decided to get off their asses and actually campaign. And so by such a small margin got him elected, which was absolutely fantastic. So if it's something that you think you might be interested in, we would love to chat to you about it today. And we have a great home in the Greens in the ACT, and we'd love to welcome you into it. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over.
Thank you so much, Christina. I think you touched on a lot of issues that I'm sure a lot of us here are really passionate about. I mean, refugee issues, for example, tax fairness, environmental issues. There are so many things out there that, we have reason to be so angry, but also energized about. And like you said, there's so much more that we could be doing. It's great that we're all here, but we would love to be seeing, so many more Greens volunteers. So if that's something you're interested in, and you're interested in actually trying to do something to channel these strong feelings that you might have of mild distaste for the policies in play in this country right now, then please speak with a person in a green shirt today and sign up to be a Greens volunteer. So with that, I would like to talk a little bit about the next person who will be speaking. I think a lot of us know who this person is. He happens to be the Australian Green Senator for WA. He's famous for a lot of reasons, ranging from his very, very warm welcome to the Prime Minister into WA a couple of years ago, to his luscious locks, which are so luscious they have their own name. Speaking of which, I think we're all really lucky, because this might be the very, maybe first and last time that we might be seeing these luscious, luscious locks named Gary. And I'm sure Scott wants to talk more about that, but if you're interested in donating to Scott's appeal, he might be shaving his hair for charity, then I'm sure you can look at that online. Maybe he wants to say a couple of words about that. But so yeah, please put your hands together for Scott Ludlam, everybody.
The whole hair thing is so weird. I don't know how that got started. Thanks for mentioning that. How amazing to see all of you here. It's so good to see you all here. I wasn't expecting such a big thing to be happening. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're on traditional ground and that this is a traditional country of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. And it's kind of nice, kind of recalling, I'm pretty sure it was a above-ground innovation that we acknowledge that mob and their ancestors and their families and their current elders every time Parliament opens. It all goes savagely downhill after that, but it's nice to start the day with an acknowledgement of whose ground we're on. I think I'm just here actually to give a tiny little intro. I'm looking forward more to the Q&A when things get rowdy, and so my intro comments are going to be fairly brief. How about Christina? We must be doing pretty well as a party if somebody... Look at what this woman has done with her life and the bio and the extraordinary achievements and think, how is this person not 90? Extraordinary stuff. So, yeah, we need to have a chat about Zed. What were you people thinking when you sent him up there? We need to have a chat about Zed. And if you're up for it and really want to link arms during the year and give the Greens a hand, presumably I'm speaking to the already converted, but just in case there's a few skeptics in the room, and replace Zed with Christina Hobbs, that would be fantastic. 2016 has to be our year. This is such an important time for us and for the work that we're doing. And if you want to know what members of the ACT Greens can get done in Parliament, I don't know whether Shane is here yet or not. I think he's due a little bit later. He says no, not yet. But we're thinking about this wonderfully graceful, intelligent, articulate and hard-working guy has done. I can actually remember election night going back a couple of years when 4 ACT candidates were elected to the Assembly, and what they've been able to deliver since then to me feels like an exemplar of how we hope our representatives will operate when we get them into a position where they can do stuff. And so this is the city, it's the first city in the country that is going to deliver 100% clean energy in an age that we're in. And as much as the Liberals might be hurling themselves into frothy hysterics at the idea that people might be catching public transport to work not too distantly from now, they've also delivered a light rail network, which is obviously just the first stage of, I think, fulfilling the original vision of this city. You look at the early maps of Burley Griffin and his team, and the cells, the little town centres around this city, were laced together with public transport. They left space, and they created a city with a kind of architecture that would support public transport, and then they forgot to build it. And Shane and his team have pulled that off, not by waving a flag on Capitol Hill and saying we are the winners, but by collaborating with people of like mind, sometimes across political divides, to get that done. And I think that makes me really proud of Shane and the ACT Greens and what you folk have delivered. And then when he needs to, he stands up and is the lone voice opposing the terror laws and opposing the kind of race to the bottom on using national security concerns as a bit of a cloak for some other rather more queasy agendas. When we needed him to stand out and pick a fight and disagree with the established old parties, he was there for us then as well. So it's kind of a shame that Mr. Rattenbury isn't here while I'm eulogising is the wrong word, isn't it? While I'm celebrating his amazing qualities, but there you go. Thanks to the ACT Greens for sending that guy there, and I'm actually kind of looking forward to territory elections later this year. If there's anything at all that I can do, because he's done an amazing job in the last couple of years, but wouldn't it be amazing to send another 2, 3, 4, 5 colleagues in there to sit with him and really rock this town? That would be quite simple. Have I got like an hour, or just should I be really quick? This has to be really quick, doesn't it? So elections, I guess, are a time, they're not necessarily even the most important part of our democracy. For crew out there who aren't really thinking about politics as such, or may not have a strong party political identity, what we really just want them to do is put a bit of paper in the box. But for us, it matters in something of a different way, because elections are where we get the chance to help kind of guide and shape things for the next couple of years. And so what we're asking for, I guess, is for this moment, for these next few months, is strength in numbers, is in talking to people and working out who it is that you reckon could come to the next one of these, so that we need a much bigger venue. And just building that strength and building the numbers and getting back to old-fashioned campaigning where we talk to people, where we get out of our comfort zones and talk to people. So I'm presuming that anybody wearing a Greens 2016 shirt sitting suspiciously close to the door are not going to let you leave unless they've got your contact details or $50 or preferably both. So please talk to these crew. The reason they're getting your contact details is that then we can collectively go out and talk to much larger and larger numbers of people. What I love about this party though is that we are not just about elections. Who wants to come to this tomorrow night? 350.org, ANU Enviro Collective, the Batch Return fundraiser, but we also have never forgotten where we came from, and that we are still going to jam a spanner into the machinery up at Lead, up at Moores Creek. If you feel like being at this tomorrow night, please clap. No, I'm just kidding. Poor Jeff. ANU Food Co-op, 3 Kingsley Street, Canberra City. That's tomorrow night. Please be there. Because politics and activism and the movement and this great work, intergenerational work that we are a part of around the world is not just about winning elections. We're getting better at it. We need to continue getting better at it. We need to continue doing it. But it is not the whole of the work. And the people who have been blockading up there need our support as well. Okay. Whew. That's kind of most of the stuff that I wanted to say. It's very nice to see you. I have no idea what's going to happen next, but I'm assured it's going to be heaps of fun. So thanks so much for all being here.
Give me 1 sec. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Scott. Again, I think touched again on a lot of issues that I think we're feeling, but we're not as good at articulating as Scott is. I guess that's why he's a senator and we're not yet. But if that's something that interests you, even if it isn't, like he said, we need to be doing things rather than just sitting here and seething in our own private little spheres. So absolutely, please talk to anybody, again, in the green shirt. Now, I'd love to kick off the next section of tonight, where I'd love to introduce 2 people to you. Sylvia and Nick. Sylvia is the Vice President of the ANU Greens on Campus Society, and Nick is the Vice President of the UC Greens Society, and they're going to be asking Scott some pretty cool questions. So put your hands together.
Hey, I'm Nick. That's your name. Thank you.
Okay. This good? Everyone yet?
Okay, cool. So, according to your Wikipedia page, you started with a career in graphic design and film. So, what made you go from that to joining politics and the Greens Party specifically?
Okay, so the mic, yeah, good. Well, for me, I had no interest in politics at all as a youngish person. I didn't get interested in politics really until it became really obvious that I needed to. So for me, what it was that kind of broke me out of the work I was doing as a graphic designer and web developer was the Jabiluka for uranium mine blockade. That Yvonne Margarula, senior traditional owner of an area that we call Kakadu National Park today, had done a national speaking tour in 1998, and I kind of joined up with local organisers, and I suspect there's probably a few in this room who can remember those days. And it was a bit like the Franklin blockade for my generation. And what I discovered after I got back from the blockade was organising and campaigning, non-violent direct action, and the legal work that goes with it was enormously valuable. And that Aboriginal family effectively took on the global nuclear industry, the mining industry, the state, federal, territory governments, and they won. And that uranium deposit has actually never been mined. But what I discovered, I will answer this question, I promise, on the way through, was that the people who were actually helping me write parliamentary questions, helping us flog the photocopier, helping us learn the mining databases that the industry used to do what it does, and kind of taught me the tools of that side of campaigning with the Greens. And so that I came across not from some strong party affiliations, just that when we really needed to bloody help, the people who were there were Greens MPs or candidates or organisers. And so here I still am.
Nice. So what do you think the Greens will achieve at the federal election this year and in the following term? Like, big question, what do you think are like the main things?
When's the election going to be? Who's for quite soon? Yeah, who's for September when we kind of mostly thought it was going to be? Okay, a bit of a majority. So look, for us, this is the first time in the history of our party at a federal level that we've had somebody's work and job at stake in every state. And so our primary, I think, obligation and our primary objective is to leave nobody behind. That all of the crew in your party room, we need them back. And we also need Christina. And how amazing would it be to throw Nigel Scullion out of work? Sorry, Nigel, if you're watching this. How extraordinary would it be to win Sydney and Wrangler? That would be quite fun. How amazing would it be to win Batman? So we can be ambitious, and I think we should be. You know, Adam's campaign, going back a couple of years, taught us the value of the face-to-face conversations and the field work. We should be ambitious. It's actually what our supporters and what the Times expect of us. We should be ambitious and we should really go for it. But I think our principle, our first objective, and what's keeping me a bit awake at night, is we need to make sure nobody loses their job this year, because that unit is too valuable for anybody to fall out. And then as for what we do with that, I think we're in the process of rebooting some tremendously important debates. So the government's grip on the economic narrative is falling to pieces, and it's tremendously entertaining. I know this is serious work, but it's also very funny when they just lose their shit like they're losing at the moment. It's wonderful. But the climate debate is changing, not just because of what happened in Paris at the end of last year, but I think it's starting to genuinely sink in, that there's a certain generational overturn that's coming through politics, and the weather itself is becoming a political actor. You know, the denialists are having to shift their posture a bit, like, well, that's weird. That must be a complete coincidence. Yes, it's happening, but it's nothing to do with us. I think we can reboot the climate debate, and I think what we have just seen in Queensland and elsewhere around the country means we are finally turning the corner on the debate around refugees and asylum seekers, and thank God, it's long overdue. So it's up to us, and people should judge us by how well we are able to channel and concentrate that changing community sentiment and drive it towards actual change that helps people. Thanks, Dave. Cheers. Excellent. Do you guys want to be?
No, good. So you just touched on this, but is the public pressure around the Let Them Stay campaign a sign that the political tides are moving away from the out-of-desk measures taken to stop the votes?
I think it is. I think we've got to be a bit careful not to generalise too hard off of something that's only just happened, right? Like in a month's time, maybe we'll all be talking about something else. But I've been tremendously encouraged by the people who showed up and the people around the country who supported them and sent them pizza. And, you know, always got to be a bit wary of the online bubble that we inhabit, and that mostly we hang out with people who agree with us. But I think something has changed in the landscape. And I think maybe the most important task now is to go back. What was the last point of agreement in the refugee debate amongst the whole polarised and bruised and sad and slightly terrified community? The last point of agreement was we need to work out how to stop people dying on the way across. That's something that actually is still, I think, the last bridge between the polarised sides of the debate. Can we stop people from dying on the way across without brutalising them or making an example of children or people who happen to find themselves in these concentration camps or these black sites, because that's what they are? I think we can. We actually can. The deterrence isn't barbed wire and you know, naval vessels. The deterrent is stay where you are, because we'll get you to safety. We will get you into Australia, we'll get you to Canada, we'll get you to New Zealand, we will get you to a place of safety. You might be here for a year or two, but you won't be here forever. That is the deterrent. We want to talk about breaking people's business models. Safety breaks the people smuggling business model, and so we have to be talking about that. And I think working with people across the political spectrum who may or may not have done unforgivable things to say, let's build a bridge back to some kind of consensus around this stuff.
Cool. You also mentioned the potential for more progress on the climate change debate. After the repeal of the carbon tax, how do you see the future of climate change policy progressing?
Oh, so we kind of did bring that a little bit tonight. Well, I think it's important to recognise that not all of Christine and Bob and Adam's package, which again, a little bit like I was thinking about Shane before, that was got with Greg Conway and Julia Gillard and Windsor and Oakeshott. Like that was got in a cross-party way by people who settled the disagreements and did a thing. And I feel like that's what you send us up there to do, that not all of that got rolled back under the Abbott onslaught. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation is still in the business of investing $2 billion a year in clean energy. And ARENA, even though they had their budget ripped out from under them, are actually still investing in innovative stuff. So some of the package is still there and it's still in business. I feel like we've got to build back on top of that. So the big picture institutional structure that we think is missing in the architecture is the Renew Australia model that Adam and Richard and Larissa launched late last year. Like that's one piece of the puzzle. Now we've got to get serious about talking about investment, because I think the debate got a bit hijacked by economists who are all a bit starry-eyed about the only thing that we need to solve this is price signals. Well, actually bullshit. It's really not going to be anywhere near enough. Yes, it should cost money to dump this stuff into the air. It shouldn't be free, and the economy should see and should have to price in carbon pollution. But actually now we need a full court press. Public transport, built form, agriculture, biodiversity, clean energy, direct investment if necessary, like everything on the table at the same time. That's where we've got to take the debate this year.
Awesome, great. So there's a more of an abstract question, but how do you decide how much to focus on different issues that are very hard to compare? So things like marriage equality, climate change, refugee rights, considering that you have limited resources like time and political influence. Like how do you decide what to focus on?
That's a really tough one.
It's a really good question, and I don't have a really good rational answer. What motivated me to get into politics in the first place was, as I said, it was anti-nuclear work and thinking black and white, this is an industry that's so destructive that it can't coexist with people. So I'm still working on, trying to prevent some of the radioactive waste dump lunacy that's going on at the moment. To kind of prioritise the things that drive you like that. When I first got elected in 2007, I can remember really clearly thinking that if possible, what I want to do while I'm here is be part of the movement that turns the ship, and I want to know the ship is turning, I want to feel it turning. And on the night actually we passed the carbon price package, you can kind of hear these groaning, shrieking noises coming from Erica Betts and Tony Abbott. That's the sound of the ship turning. I like that sound. And then the bastards got their hands on the wheels and started turning the part back. But the turning of the ship stuff is what really motivates me and what I spend most of my time on. And then, so that's the head stuff speaking, like that's my sort of rational calculations, yes, I want to work on these things. And then every now and again, the heart takes over. So I'm doing a bunch of work at the moment on a thing called chronic fatigue syndrome, MECFS, myalgic encephalomyelitis / chronic fatigue syndrome, which affects anything up to 400,000 Australians, and people have just fallen through the cracks and got lost. It's not portfolio of mine, it's not specifically a Western Australian thing, but God help us, we've got to do more for these people, and there's really interesting breakthroughs going on. So that wasn't in our strategic plan. Some of my staff crew are here, sorry about that, I just made that one up. And it really matters to people. I think we all have those projects where you think, bugger it, I'm going to use this platform because I see an opportunity in front of me. That's not in the strategic plan, but maybe I'll stay up a couple of hours later and do a bit of that. I might try and keep my answers a bit more concise. So.
They're good. What are your views on reforming foreign aid, both in terms of increasing the amount that Australia gives and also giving in ways where our money can do the most good?
I feel like I've seen firsthand in Tibet and in Burma in particular, maybe some other examples, but those are the two that come to mind, where I got to visit those places briefly over the last couple of years, and I've actually seen firsthand the difference that our aid budget makes. And so yes, I think it should go up, and Lee's done some really powerful work in the last couple of years on, first of all, getting to 0.5% of gross national income, and then getting the path and having it costed to get to 0.7. which is nothing more or less than obligations that we already signed up to. So the money should go up, but I don't think we should see it as a cost. And unfortunately, it's such an easy target. And Labor were on their way. Like, yes, they were criticised because they obviously weren't going fast enough, but the aid budget had taken some jumps, and now these lunatics more recently have just torn it apart. You could, even if you wanted to look at it purely through the lens of self-interest, it's kind of insurance. It builds goodwill, and it actually reduces child mortality. And like, what kind of political talking point says we should reduce the budget for that? As we move deeper into the age of climate change, everything that we can do to build resilience around neighbouring countries, even though foreign aid is not obviously just a climate issue, but anything at all that we can do to help people confront the stuff that's coming down the line is of benefit to us. If you want to look at it through that kind of lens, but actually we're all family. If you're an Indonesian family, if you're a Tibetan family, if you're a Rohingyan family, we are all family. And this is one of the richest societies that has ever existed on the face of the earth. So the other thing that happens obviously is kind of boomerang aid, where we say, well, actually we're going to invest some of our foreign aid in PNG, helping BP build a gargantuan gas plant, and then all the contractors will be Australian. Or some of our foreign aid goes to propping up some kind of hideous regimes and getting them to use our foreign aid to stop people from leaving the hideous regimes and climbing on boats. Some of what we spend our foreign aid budget on is so massively counterproductive as that we should think of some other things at core. So there's a heap of work to do. And look, if we're not going to drive that debate, quite frankly, who is going to do that?
Excellent. So you're well known for doing things that appeal to young people, such as the Rap News YouTube video and Reddit AMA. Is this a conscious effort to engage young people in the political discourse?
Not really. I just think I'm trapped in this job. I should have some fun. And, I really love the Juice Rap News guys. I think they do fantastic work. So if you like their stuff, please share that. And they invited me to do this thing. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And then they invited me again, and they invited me again. I was like, yeah, actually, God, they kick ass. Why not? I'm happy to be an object of ridicule as long as benign ridicule, right? So that, and it felt mostly reasonably benign. And the AMA thing, it was actually Dave's idea. It was just like, here's a platform of people who, like, the community rules around that place are kind of fascinating in their own way. So dig a toe in, got really savagely abused and thought, oh, this is really interesting. Went back in and we had the most fascinating kind of conversation over the course of an hour. Who's on Reddit? Like, who uses that regularly or semi-regularly? Yeah, not enough. Hop on there and see, and don't be put off. Like, every social media platform kind of has its own cultural norms. Persist is fascinating. Because then the debate and the conversation ended up not being abusive at all, because the trolls all got voted into the toilet, and then some really interesting questions rose up, and the conversation was fascinating. So I don't know, I mean, maybe it is a platform for young people. I don't know if there's a huge amount of evidence to back that up. I just think it's fun, and it's reaching people where they are and talking about stuff people want to talk about.
It's really good to hear. What are your thoughts on the US election that's happening this year? Are you feeling the burns?
Yes. There aren't actually many things taped to our window in our Senate office up in that building, but two of the things that are there are Bernie Sanders memes, which is kind of funny. How sad is it? You know, there is a US Greens party that worked their guts out, and that the last time their electoral system had a fairly serious look in the United States at a federal level was 1804. You know, they are playing with a broken electoral system. They don't have proportional representation. And so I think what Bernie Sanders is doing there is extraordinary. You look at the demographics of his vote and think, that is powerful. Even if he loses the nomination to whoever it is that he's running against, that attitude and those demographics are not going away. The old people, no disrespect, and the billionaires are going to vote for Hillary, and the machine is possibly, I don't know, going to get her over the line. But all those people aren't going away, the people who are voting for the Sanders campaign. But how sad it is that you would be telling a Green voter over there that if you vote Green, you're costing a Democrat president the vote. Don't ever forget Al Gore. Like, that's crap. Their electoral system is shot. And I've never spoken to anybody with any engagement in US politics who feels like there's a pathway to fixing the electoral reform system. It'd touch off a second civil war. And apart from that, I think the country is fundamentally really broken and quite dangerous at the moment. So Sanders is doing this remarkable populist thing and motivating people to do this beautiful stuff, this amazing organising. And then Trump is over on this side doing what he is doing, and it's working. I don't find Trump scary, I find the movement around him terrifying. A lot of people are resonating with what he's saying. And I think the funniest thing of all is that what finally alienated the Republican machine from him was when he pushed the 9/11 conspiracy theory that George W. Bush was president at the time of the attacks in New York and Washington. And that was what upset the Republican establishment, was that he kind of named the bleeding obvious. So I think America is actually at a really dangerous place at the moment, which is partly why we might want to think about a more independent foreign policy while our wounded superpower ally figures out exactly how it wants to spend the 21st century. Yes, I'm feeling it.
So we've had a recent victory in the ACT with the privacy zoning legislation, and in general the ACT is very progressive abortion laws relative to other places. But yeah, so other states are much more restrictive. Is there any chance that this could change on a federal level, or anything that we can want to do about it? So like in Queensland, I think the requirements to get an abortion are way more restricted than the ACT. So like it's
still in the criminal code.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And in other places, it's kind of a hideous grey area. I think Larissa's been doing really good work on that, and it's not just the green stuff. Actually, I think the Sex Party has also played a productive role. So you can start with, can people please not abuse women going in and out of these places, even for consultancies with hideous billboards and banners and that kind of stuff. So some of it is around legalisation, some of it is about basic common respect. I don't know what you guys think. I mean, sometimes it's better to avoid a full frontal confrontation on this kind of stuff because it should be bleeding obvious. It should be something that we don't even have to fight over. But maybe it is time to talk about national unified laws. It's one of those things with federation, is that the states and territories get to play in their own space a bit and come up with frameworks that are better or worse. But there are some things that should simply be above politics. And that's obviously one of them. I kind of wish Larissa was up here because she'd probably jump to her feet and really go for it.
We'll get her next time.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about social policy. What would you say to someone who doesn't vote for the Greens solely on the basis of economic policy?
Because we don't care about the economy?
Well, that's what they say.
Because we hate the economy. What? I would say that we should meet that person halfway. That we should have a good think about what our economic vision and strategy is, and that we should communicate that well, and that we should prioritise it in the thinking that we do and in the stuff that we get costed and in our documentation and that kind of stuff. And we should also try and reach people directly, because as I say, it's like a 5-minute conversation and you can bowl that one over. That actually we don't hate the economy. Some of my best friends are in the economy. It's really kind of silly, and that sometimes the arguments that are being advanced about us, like, oh, the Greens are trying to shut down the productive economy while getting the productive economy to pay for everything, for all your kind of unicorn vanity projects and stuff. So, whoa, hold on. Some of these same folks are the ones who thought that simply ever-increasing extraction and blowing up and chopping down of bulk low-value commodities was just going to work forever. And growth, and growth, and growth, and growth until you blow everything up, cut everything down, kill all the fish. That's your economic strategy. These are some of the same people that we're competing against. We have a really powerful story to tell and an urgent story to tell. So I think we should meet that person halfway with a bit of evidence that we do care, and we might have to talk about it in a bit of a different way. And I think we could do with a greater appreciation and understanding within our own movement what our economic goals are. Like maybe we haven't done that well enough. So a bit of column A and a bit of column B. Let's meet that young voter halfway at least. Yeah. And Adam, as far as I'm concerned, Adam and Pete are doing exactly that. Like, I didn't just make this up on the spot up here on the stage. It's like, that's precisely what we're doing. And watch this space a bit. I feel like, let's take some credit for, I was going to stop, but then I started up again, is that right? Okay, thanks. We can take credit for the biggest macroeconomic reform probably of the last decade, yeah, which was the carbon price instrument, which was its price pollution, let's compensate people, let's change the tax scales, let's set up a biodiversity fund, and let's actually tilt the economic table, drive emissions down, drive a new sector into existence. Like, that's a big picture tax reform that Christine and Bob and Adam initiated and get to own. We're also helping drive the negative gearing debate. Like, we ignited the negative gearing debate whenever it was, June, July last year, capital gains tax not long after that. The Labor Party has finally joined the party. They had 6 years in government. We couldn't get them to even say the two words together in a sentence, but they're here now, they've joined up, they're late to the party, but it's fine. At least they've actually put a policy initiative into the field, and the Turnbull people are just disintegrating. Like the Kelly O'Dwyer thing, it'll push house prices up. The Prime Minister thing, it'll crush house prices. It's wonderful. Like, it's such fun. And we've helped drive that comedy of errors, and so we shouldn't be apologetic about how we don't care about the economy. Like, we're actually helping shape the debate around it. We'll stop now. Shane Ramsey, everyone.
So last question from us before we open it up to the audience. So hypothetically, if there's like a young person in the audience who's got really inspired by this talk and wants to, get involved in politics and do things to improve like the world and stuff, what should they do?
And stuff. I feel like I already gave you my slightly condescending lecture on that a little bit earlier, so all I would ask you to do is talk to the crew in the Greens t-shirts who are already here and already kind of working out how to make the best of this amazing year. Meet Christina if you haven't met her. Meet your candidate. It actually is quite a big deal to put your face on the poster like that and be the one who's kind of got your name out there. So please meet Christina tonight and meet some of the campaigners who are helping build this effort. We are getting better at this. We're actually getting quite good at it, such that it's starting to freak some of the other lot out a bit, which is also very entertaining. But now is when we actually need numbers. Now is when we need all of us. Find the others. Think of the 3 people outside this room who probably would have appreciated being here. This is not a burden that we're placing on people. Please get someone utterly kick-ass elected to the federal Senate. It's an opportunity. It's actually a bit of a gift. It's like you will have heaps of fun. Like how much fun you're having, you'll look like you're having heaps of fun. All of the people who could have been here who were doing some other silly thing instead of this, they need to be here. So at the moment, it's about building the crowd and getting organised and working with the people who are building the organising structures. Talk to Christina, I mean it.
Awesome, thanks, Sean. So I'll hand it back to Harry.
So thank you so much, Scott, for answering all those questions, fielding them all beautifully, I must say very entertainingly as well, from Sylvia and Nick. And now, if you do want to be part of this conversation, we are going to open up the floor to some questions. I'll ask Christina also to come and join Scott up here. We'll have Sylvia and Nick running around with the microphone I've just realised is in my hands.
Yep.
And I'll just talk to you like this for now. I think that's okay. Great.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
Yes, I think
Okay, perfect.
we can share.
We can share.
Could you guys share and then?
Could you share?
Okay.
Oh, I think
That works out well.
Actually, no. Can we? You're recording. Sorry, I knew there was a reason.
No, I'm keeping this one.
it's a bit of like.
That's okay. I'm good. Oh,
Okay, so hands up if you have a question. I'll come to you with the microphone.
okay, let me pick
Oh yeah.
somebody completely at random for the first question. Oh, Shane, you look like you have a question.
Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry I'm a bit late. I was at an election event already tonight. But Scott, the ACT, of course, we're building our first light rail now. We are thinking about whether we should extend it through to Russell. And we're sort of pleading with the federal government to get some money to help us keep building the infrastructure they're telling us we should be building. Do you think we can get it out of the federal government? Because I'm sure you know better than I do. So.
Just thinking, ask Zed. It's a serious question, so a very quick answer. Yes, I think it is possible. I think it's good to have a Prime Minister who doesn't hate public transport and who uses it once in a while. Yes, he Instagrams himself every time he hops onto a tram, But it's actually like from the heart. He uses public transport, and some of these folks I suspect haven't climbed onto a bus since they were in long pants. So I think yes, it's possible. We went to the Gold Coast. Our Prime Minister, the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull, went to the Gold Coast a couple of months ago and dropped $90 million on them for their light rail extension to hook it up to the railway line coming south out of Brisbane. Good. So yes, it's absolutely possible, as long as the work gets done. I was a bit surprised to hear that the second leg was going to go out to Russell, but now I kind of get it. And also the most important thing is there's a second leg. After that, there'll be a third one. It's like building the capacity inside the public service and the engineering companies to keep laying it out. The first step's the most important, and then getting that commitment to a second is great. So yeah, get some federal funds. Excellent idea.
I just want to add to that, because something very interesting happened in the office the other day, in that we were sort of going back through some cached websites, and we actually found the press release that Zed wrote. Can I talk about this already? Yeah. Okay. And we actually found a press release that Zed wrote not that long ago when he was in ACT Parliament, berating the Labor Party for being so slow on bringing in light rail to the ACT, and how the Liberal Party have identified so many benefits of light rail in the ACT, and how it was so disappointing that Labor was dragging their feet. So watch this space. I think we will be asking Zed about this question.
Anyone else got a question? What about yourself?
After the very dark days of Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull has tried to position himself as a massive proponent of science. And I want to know your opinion on that. Are we finally heading down the right direction? Is it enough? And where to from here? How can Canberra get involved in that?
Not ransacking Sorrow would be really No, it's a little bit like on transport, only without the $95 million for light rail. It's like the language has changed, and the attitude has changed. And it's like the tip of the iceberg is really different. It's heaps shinier. And then you look underneath and it's like this whole seething mass below the waterline is kind of just about as it was. So you get these sort of decisions, which, you know I get a one jump removed from the executive government at CSIRO. It's like, we have hundreds of climate scientists. We don't need all these people. Everyone agrees that it's really hot, so we get rid of them all. And the actions are basically as they were. So, do you want to have a crack at that? I think different language, same crappy stuff going on. No, I don't think we haven't turned the corner on that really at all.
Okay.
Christina, earlier you said that you were in quite a fortunate position of having a really close ACT Senate race. So my question is quite simply, what do you think your chances are of beating Zed?
Well, I think I will beat Zed. And I think there's a lot of different reasons for why that could happen. But I was recently reading Andrew Lee's book on the luck of politics. And one of his very interesting observations, not to sound like myself, was that better-looking people tend to get elected. If nothing else, I have Zed in that department. Scott, would you like to add to that?
That's the cheekiest thing I've ever heard. Next question.
Who else has got a question? What about from this woman here?
It's more of kind of playing to the crowd, and also because of backgrounds of people on the stage, and the whole thing that we have is under Abbott, where apparently it's an unruly rabble on Twitter, and their attitude about social media and the internet with their boondoggle with the NBN. It's more of they sway between going, oh look, people are upset on the internet, but then they are of no account. How do we actually make them aware that this is the 21st century and this is how people engage with politics and show their displeasure with what's going on?
That's so good. I think, was it electronic graffiti? That was one of Abbott's other comments, wasn't it? It's like people on Twitter. I got that a bit in the Canning by-election late last year as well. Captain Andrew Hastie was like, I'm not here to represent the East Coast Twitterati. We do have the internet in Armadale. But I think it's still a good question, because politics, like many other things, I think is in transition. And there's a feeling, which I've held myself up until really recently, that elections are still won or lost on the front page of the Daily Telegraph and on the 8-second news grab on the evening news. Now the thing is, the Murdoch tabloids told people not to change the government in Victoria last year. They emphatically told people not to throw Campbell Newman out last year, and people have actually had a gutful. So I think the power of these traditional platforms is diminishing and eroding really rapidly. It's not nothing, and there are obviously still really good people working in some of those organisations, writing and doing good stuff. But the medium itself the online medium is just really rapidly eroding the power of those traditional platforms. And we've never been in this party in a position before where, with a couple of hours careful work and then the push of a button, we can reach between 10 or 20% of our vote directly, many of them by name. We've never been in a position to be able to do that before, to 2 or 300,000 people. So I think that is changing things rapidly, and I also think we're a bit better adapted to a platform where the internet calls out bullshit really quickly. It calls it out and then it tears it to pieces and it mocks it brutally. And so you can't get away with some of the stuff that Labor or even the coalition, when they kind of put a toe in the water, try to get away with, because it just gets torn to pieces. And I think they can ignore the medium at their peril, to be perfectly honest. I think the transition's still underway and it's got a way to go, but they really ignore that medium at its peril. Because the internet it's a communications platform, but it's not just broadcast. It's many to many. You can talk back, and that's fantastic. It's also an organising platform. And yes, we use the power of the internet and the power of digital tools to organise mass door-knocking events, where actually we're doing this old school stuff like in the 1980s, where you went and knocked on the door and said, "Hi, I don't know you, but this is why I'm doing this thing." So it's a communications platform, it's an organising platform, but it's also a contested political space where the rules of the medium itself are being fought over on issues like data retention, surveillance, mass driftnet style surveillance of whole populations, or website blocking, or these various other things like the whole copyright agenda and the surveillance agenda. The medium itself is a site of intense political contest, and the major parties, Labor, Liberal, the Nationals, when they bother to turn up, are on the wrong side of those contests. So Bill Shorten can pop up all of the memes he wants on important stuff like trade unions or other stuff that the Labor Party claim to represent, and then 1,000 people will hit the comments and go, "But why the hell did you sell out our medium? Why did you sell us out on data retention?" Really difficult to get your message across when the medium itself is calling out your crap. And I think they forget that kind of thing at their peril.
Yeah, I think the other thing is looking at how we campaign as well, where we can never match the media budgets of the old parties. It simply won't happen because we don't take the same donations from the same people as them. It's so important and powerful for us, and this idea of having a conversation with people, and we invest in things like door knocking and stalks where we can have a 30-second, 1-minute conversation with someone and change their vote. And I think that social media is really in line with this, where you might post something and 80% of people who read it won't comment, but you're having that conversation. And I think it's a really important thing that a role that everybody can play is, sharing that content, having a view, and even if people aren't commenting or writing on your social media, people are reading it, and that's really, really important.
We'll take a question from this gentleman up the front. Would it be easy? No, I think he's running. He's on the move. Just like a green spot. Sorry.
Like a lifelong career as a professor, I think I could speak loud enough for everybody to hear without the mic. Anyway, very good to see Scott here. For the last 2 or 3 years I've been doing the door knocking for Scott in Western Australia, but never got to see him. Good to see him in ACT, now they moved to ACT. I have been a political activist, a political scientist, whatnot, but purposefully always remained away from party politics. At this end of my life, I finally decided to join a party and chose the Green. Partly because I think what will work in the long run, politics what Greens are doing, the door knocking and grassroots level campaigning and all that, and various other agenda issues those are. I thought to myself, how can I contribute, apart from my legal skills and all that, what in the field I can do. And I thought one area which the Greens are, shall I say, weak or is not having drawn in the large reservoir of untapped immigrant voters. And that is where I put my mind to, and with that very marginal election last time I did try when knocking and giving sermons, changing my dress and giving sermons to the various traditional groups, and I think it did work. But what I find is our rhetoric or our image as Green is quite repulsive to, if I can say it bluntly, to all these immigrants which are coming, the first generation immigrant coming, they're not the European immigrants. Even the European immigrants, first generation was the problem. But these are Asian immigrants coming from places like Syria and so on. And the first thing when I knocked and got into the home, they would not let me in. The image was here, Green, that these are the people who want to make men marry men. Okay. So this is the image issue, I think, or rhetoric issue. I've been thinking, is there any other language we can use? For example, I have my own pet idea. We can just go for deregulating marriage or between men and men, or women and women, man and cat, or whatever. The government has nothing to, but in them it's like personal relationship. Could we change our rhetoric or a bit slant of what we're doing on this front? Maybe something a very large scale thing. But that's what the question.
I might let Scott answer on deregulating marriage, but I think there's another interesting point you raised about the need to engage people from different cultural and ethnic groups, and I think it's true because I think many of us who are in the Greens or support the Greens would like to think that we do that, and I think we are to some extent, but there's a huge need, I think, for us to get out and engage with those people, and something I've been doing over the last few months is trying to talk to different people, different cultural groups, ethnic groups. And what I sort of, obviously every group and every person is different, but something that I've heard from almost every leader of an ethnic group in Canberra that I've spoken to is that they just don't really feel like politics is something for them. They look at federal politics and they look at politics in the ACT and everyone's white. They don't see anyone who looks like them. They don't see anyone who talks to them. And a lot of them just sort of feel like they don't have much of a stake in the political process or understand that the issues that affect them are actually political issues. So for instance, I was talking to a leader in the African community and 95% of Africans in Canberra are engaged in the caring profession. And I was sort of saying to him, do you know that our current Liberal Senator wants to scrap your Sunday penalty rates? And he was saying, well, we couldn't survive without those Sunday penalty rates. We work every day, but everyone in my community works Sundays in caring professions because if we only worked in the weekdays, we couldn't, afford to live. And explaining this to him and explaining this as a political issue was really important, but before that, he couldn't even understand how politics could affect his life. And so I think we as a party and we who care about these issues have to make an effort to go out to people and to meet them where they're at and to understand what their issues are and to talk to those issues. And now let's Scott talk about deregulating marriage.
I've never heard it like that. That's really fun. That's excellent. I don't disagree. Hey, thank you for door knocking. That made a really big difference. So thanks for going out for us in WA. I'm not going to contest your basic premise that we've got to do a lot better at being inclusive. I can remember really clearly a couple of years ago at a Greens WA Reps Council meeting looking around the room and wondering whether or not to propose changing our name from the Greens to the Whites. Because it's like everybody here looks and sounds exactly like me and that's shit. We're poorer as a party for that. So I think we've started, I don't know what it's like here in the ACT, but in WA a couple of months ago, 6 or 8 months ago, formed up I don't know if it's our first, but it's our first recent culturally and linguistically diverse Greens group. It's like, we're not going to tell you how to make the party better, you help us make the party better. And at the same time, local Aboriginal working group within the Greens WA. And I figure that's how we've actually got to do it. I'm not super interested in going out and preaching at people. We've got to bring people in and recognise that we're just a lot stronger together. And this might be going a little bit off topic maybe, but I think even those in the LGBTI community wish we could stop talking about gay marriage, get it the hell done and move on to issues that are, you know, important even over and above to that community. Beyond this basic rights issue, I think most people can't believe that we're still having to have this argument. So if you hear it a lot in our political communication at the moment, it's because it feels like we're just perched at getting it over the line. It's a basic thing that we should have had finished years ago, actually. And then, yeah, it's like, well, what is of interest to this community? Like, what are people contending with in Australian society at the moment? That's where we've got to meet people. But it's a shame, I guess. I don't know quite how to deal with your basic question of if that's what you hear from family or from colleagues or from people that you're trying to engage with. I wish we had that one finished up as well. Definitely no cats involved. No cats.
No cats, all right. You over there in the shirt, yep, you're right at the back.
Yeah, works. First of all, I've spent the last 5 years in Australia, and I come from Germany, and I've seen the Greens rise in Germany and just keep on chipping. The Greens just got, I think, 38% of the polls in Baden-Württemberg, so... And that is what we call it a black state, because the main party that was traditionally there has the colour black, and they're very traditional, and you know, all these things from the old ages, sort of. So my question is, how could you benefit from working with other Green parties or other parties that are more progressive in other countries, and just, you know, meet them at summits or meet them online and talk to them how they solved issues, how they went forward, how they could, you know, get themselves forward in the political scheme, and also learn from their mistakes and what you could do better.
Okay. Quick show of hands. Who has heard of the Global Greens?
Yeah.
Less than half the room. So we're not doing our job well enough. So less than half the room is aware that precisely the kind of network that you're proposing already exists, and it was booted off in this town in 2001. It was the inaugural global council conference, if you will, of global Green parties from all over the world. So the European Greens are obviously pretty strong, German Greens fairly central to that. There's also an amazing presence in Africa. It was Frank Habineza not all that long ago who was living in exile in Sweden because the president of the Greens party in Rwanda had been murdered. He'd been decapitated and his body had been found by the side of the road. He took his family and went to exile in Sweden, and I think at some point, maybe at a Global Greens meeting, had met Bob Brown and did an Australian trip. I learned more about the reality of Greens politics and life on this planet in about an hour with Frank than I think I had in the previous 10 years. So Australia's role has been quite important actually in convening that Global Greens network. So here it's the Australian Pacific Greens Federation, the AGPF, and we had our last meeting was in New Zealand, I think in about August. I think we can do it heaps better. The experience of the Filipino Greens, as you can probably imagine, pretty damn different to the kind of stuff that we contend with here. We're talking to activists who are absolutely on the front line and whose lives and families' lives are at risk of serious threat for their work. So we do try to support them. The MPs all pay a tithe of 1%. Your membership fees are actually tied quietly to the Global Greens as well, to the AGPF, to make sure that we're supporting people whose political work is potentially a lot costlier than ours is frequently. But on issue by issue campaigning, I think we could do a ton better. I think we could do a lot better with people in different countries whose experiences are different, but whose challenges may well be very, very similar to ours. So it's a really good reminder.
Great. We'll just take two more questions, having a look at the time. You, sir, in the shirt and tie? Just go ahead.
G'day guys, well my name's Jonathan, I'm one of our territory election candidates, but more importantly, I too, thank you Scott, am a gay man who's sick of rallying for marriage equality. I never want to go to another marriage equality rally again. But on the subject of LGBTIQ people, the thing that's really concerning me at the moment is obviously the inquiry into the Safer Schools Coalition. I was curious, I was listening to Senator Sims today, or yesterday, give a speech, where I think a bit tongue-in-cheek he made the suggestion that we should be launching a very similar inquiry into the chaplaincy program. If the concern of people like Corey Bernardi is actually indoctrination in schools, perhaps that would be a pretty good place to start. I'm curious if that was more of a flippant remark, or if that is a genuine line of campaigning that we might like to go under drawing a closer watch on the chaplaincy program. And the broader question that I have around that is how we position ourselves in light of this debate around the Safer Schools Coalition, and how that's really marginalising and attacking some of the most vulnerable people just before we're launching into a pretty national marriage equality debate around the plebiscite.
I'd have to check with Rob because I didn't hear that speech firsthand.
I think it was a question, sorry, to the...
It was question time?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would have to check with Rob to give you a definitive answer. I don't know, and I'd be interested to kind of test the mood of the room as to whether that's a front we want to open up, or whether at the moment we are better off concentrating on protecting precisely the kind of kids that you're talking about. I think the debate's gone to, and maybe about to go to, a very dangerous place. If this plebiscite gets up, and you give $1 million or more to the Australian Christian lobby to go out and tell some kids that they're wrong, that their lives are wrong, that their whole being is wrong, that kind of inflames and unhinges the likes of Corey Bernardi and others. I think it takes the debate to an incredibly dangerous place. So wouldn't want to kind of second guess where Rob's head is at with that at the moment, but for my 2 cents worth is I think we actually need to look at protecting people at the moment and keep the debate a bit focused on where it's gone, and try to get the Prime Minister to call in some of the more toxic elements of his backbench into line. He's doing no credit to himself at the moment.
Fantastic. And one last question. Over there in the back, gentleman in the Batman shirt. That won me.
Thank you. We see throughout the Western world, in our allies, especially in the US and the UK, a big rise on the left recently. US is the perfectly clear example. However, in Australia, we don't see that. That's a point some journalists and many people on the left are seeing. Sorry to end on this note, but a lot of people are suggesting that since Di Natale's appointment, the Greens have moved away from their activist base and are more focusing on trying to have a government role that isn't really coming to place, and the left in Australia isn't seeing the rise as it is in the US and the UK. And I just wonder what you blame to that.
I want to give a couple of comments and I hand over to Scott. I think, first of all, I'm not sure if the premise of your question is necessarily correct. I'm friends with a lot of activists, and I feel like I'm quite engaged in that community, and I feel that people that are quite, are activists will still vote Green. I feel in Australia, and if you look at what's happening in the US and in the UK, it's actually that the middle ground is shifting to become more activist, that the middle ground of those countries have realised that their country is in crisis, that their country faces really great problems, that what is at stake is it so great that they're willing to really shift and look for something, and they're looking for something completely different. And I'd argue that in what we're seeing in the US is not being led by the hard left, it's being led and generated by a middle ground that feels under threat. And I think that anyone, from my own experience, I can say that anyone will become an activist when they feel that the things that they really value and they really care about are under threat. And I think that in Australia we're not quite at the same level that we are in the US, but I feel that middle ground is more and more moving, and I think we are seeing a shift towards the Greens. And I think that the role that Richard is playing by, I think keeping to the core values of the Greens, but trying to show how those core values apply across a greater range of issues, so that we're not just about the environment, we're not just about refugees, that we're also about healthcare, and hey, how important is healthcare, and that we're also, really engaged in all these other issues is really important with that. I think that we will see more and more people coming towards the Greens, as we are seeing, and we see it every day in the office. I have people coming in, and people aren't shifting Liberal Party, Labor Party, the Greens in some kind of curve or linear fashion. We're getting people coming over saying, I've voted Liberal my whole life and now I want to vote the Greens because I care about this issue and this is outrageous. And I think that's what we're going to see more and more of, which is really exciting.
I definitely don't think you should be apologetic about raising the question or lowering the tone. I think it's good. I think maybe we just got a bit sick of being called extremists. Like really over it. being called extremists for not wanting to crash the climate or touch off a mass extinction event or even drive the economy into the ground or torture children as some kind of national security statement. Really sick of being called an extremist for believing that everybody has the same rights no matter their race, gender, sexuality, whatever. These are not extreme positions. These are positions that you can come from an activist background and hold very firmly, and I will see you at there. Or you can come from a life's work as a GP or do an Aboriginal health in Tennant Creek and be wearing a suit and tie and actually rocking a waistcoat, and this is Richard I'm referring to, obviously, and hold those views just as fervently. He doesn't come from an activist background. I don't know that he's ever been pulled off a piece of equipment in a forest blockade. He cares about this stuff in the same way that we all do in this movement. So I think it's part of maturing as a movement, that we are not extremists and we do not need to be apologetic or defensive about holding basic principles that are actually really across political lines, even entrenched political lines. There's a really perceptive piece gone up by Jason Wilson on The Guardian a couple of weeks back, which looks like you might have seen, which I encourage people to go out and read because it kind of brought that perspective. It's like, what's going on in Australia? We've got Jeremy Corbyn as the Labour opposition leader in the UK. We've got Bernie Sanders absolutely carving up in the Democratic primaries in the US. All I would do is just caution a little bit about context. They've had brutal austerity in the UK, polarising and highly weaponised inequality in the United States. And the movements are pushing back in quite a different economic context to what happened here in Australia. Quite frankly, the Pilbara and coalfields on the east coast of Australia kept us out of the global financial crisis, as well as dumping a huge, kind of ton of cash into the economy, which meant those austerity policies have been a bit slimy and underhanded and chipping away, rather than a sort of full frontal attack that they got in the US and the UK. So yeah, you're seeing a hell polarised movement and a pendulum swinging back. But I think what dear Wilson didn't quite get in his article, which I nonetheless thought was perceptive and valuable, was that we've been here for 20 years. We haven't just shown up 5 minutes ago and built the largest parliamentary representation that we've ever seen in this country of a Green Party, of a party that's arguably professing these radical ideas. We're just going to carry on. We don't need to build this revolution from scratch because we've been at it for 20 years. So sure, I wish 100,000 people were here at this politics in the pub right now. So let's ask ourselves why that's not happening and get better at what it is that we do. I think the critique is valuable. I think the contexts are different. And sure, let's get better at it. Let's build a mass movement. We don't actually have time to sit here feeling sorry for ourselves. Please give your name, address, and $50 to the people in Greens t-shirts. Thanks so much for coming. Unfortunately, over the block, we've got a late line coming up. So I need to go and prep a bit about the merger of ABC and SBS. Quick hands up, who thinks that's a great idea? It's a shit idea. Where did that come from?
But didn't they just pass legislation to change the media merger laws this afternoon?
They didn't pass the ledge yet. They floated this big, expansive, stinky-sounding thought bubble. That's all that's come out. There's no bill. Watch the space on the bill. Anyway, so I get to run reasonably shortly, not immediately, but quite soon. But thank you so much. You're all adorable. Thank you for
Thank you guys so much for those really interesting and diverse questions, and also to Scott and Christina for the really genuine, impassioned answers. Like Scott said, unfortunately he has to run, but I just want to give in a really quick plug for regional politics in the pub tomorrow. If you really can't get enough of Christina, she's going to be there again tomorrow. So back here, same time tomorrow, 6:30 tomorrow. Lastly, as I said, Scott has to run, but we still do have the prize draw, which we're going to get Scott and Christina to pull out 2 names of people, and then you can have a drink with Christina at the bar, if that's okay.
It will also be fast.
Well, I mean, Scott.
What exactly do you want?
We're getting picked up at 9, so we could have a quick drink, or we could reschedule and do it properly.
Okay.
Okay, the winners are going to have a super quick drink with Scott right now, so let's do the prize draw, guys. All right, ready? Drum roll, etc. Alright, the first person is
amazing game.
Thank you so much for enrolling and getting the name November Destiny comes to mind today.
And person number 2 is Michael Salt. Fantastic. So to our 2 lucky winners, if you could head over to the bar reasonably speedily, you can have a couple of amazing minutes with Scott and Christina. They're probably going to be the best of your lives, so get over there as quickly as you can.